I need to tell you something. Ben is planning something for the gala. I don't know all the details.
Ben? What kind of thing?
I heard him talking to Marcus this morning. Something about making sure you're turned away at the door. He's gonna tell the staff at the entrance that you don't have a legitimate invitation.
What, a fake?
I told him how I felt, but he just walked away.
Thank you for telling me. Let him.
The first day Daniel walked through the gates of Westbridge Elite Academy, everything about him looked wrong. At least, that's what everyone thought. The other students arrived in shiny cars. Some had drivers. A few had people carrying their bags. The school uniform alone cost more than most people earn in a month, and these students wore it like a crown. Daniel wore his uniform too, but under his arm was a worn backpack, the kind washed so many times the color had faded to almost nothing. His shoes were clean but old. His hair was neat but simple. He didn't rush. He didn't look around with wide, nervous eyes. He just walked, calm and steady, like a boy who had nothing to prove to anyone. Nobody greeted him. Nobody smiled. A few students glanced at him, then looked away. Others whispered behind their hands. Who is that? Probably a charity case. Why do they keep letting people like that in here? Daniel heard every single word. His face didn't change. He found a seat at the far end of the lunch hall, sat alone, pulled out a small notebook, and began writing quietly. That's when Ben noticed him. Ben was tall, loud, and used to owning every room. He nudged his friends and nodded toward Daniel with a smirk. "Look at that guy," he said slowly. And just like that, without saying a word, Daniel became a target. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my Tales story from.
The next morning, things got worse. It happened during class. The teacher asked a difficult question. One of those questions that makes even the smart students go quiet and stare at the ceiling. Before anyone could think, Ben turned in his seat and looked straight at Daniel with a wide grin. "Hey, maybe our new student knows," Ben said loudly. "After all, someone from the streets must have learned a lot the hard way, right?" The class erupted in laughter. The teacher said nothing. Some teachers go quiet when the loudest boy in the room speaks. Everyone watched Daniel, waiting to see him shrink, waiting for his face to go red, waiting for him to mumble, stammer, or look at the floor. Instead, Daniel slowly raised his hand. The teacher nodded, surprised. Daniel stood up and answered the question, completely, correctly, calmly. He used words that made even the teacher blink twice and sit up straighter. When he finished, the room was dead silent. No laughter this time. Ben's smirk was gone. In its place was something else, a tight jaw and cold eyes. The teacher cleared his throat and said, "That is correct. Very well done." Daniel sat back down and opened his notebook like nothing had happened. But Ben's hands were flat on his desk, still, tense. That kind of embarrassment doesn't disappear. It turns into something darker. The next day at lunch, Ben had a plan. It wasn't complicated. It didn't need to be. Sometimes cruelty is simple. Daniel was walking carefully through the crowded lunchroom, holding his tray with both hands. He wasn't looking for trouble. He never was. He found a gap between tables and started moving through it. Ben stepped right into his path. The bump was hard and fast. Shoulder into tray, tray into air. Food flew everywhere. The tray clattered to the floor with a sound that turned every head in the room. Rice, sauce, and juice spread across the floor tiles in a mess that couldn't be missed. Students pulled out their phones immediately. Some laughed, some recorded. A few waited to see what Daniel would do next. Ben stood over the mess with his arms wide open, playing innocent. "Whoops," he said with a grin. "Sorry about that, charity boy." More laughter. Daniel stood still for one quiet moment. Then he bent down. Without a single word, he picked up the tray. He stacked the spilled food as best he could. He walked to the corner, got a handful of napkins, came back, and began cleaning the floor on his knees. Not one word of anger, not one look of hate, just quiet hands doing a quiet job. The laughter slowly faded. Most students looked away, but one girl didn't. Lily stood near the wall, watching Daniel closely. Her eyes were serious and still. After school that day, Lily caught up with Daniel near the side gate. She had been thinking about him all afternoon. She had seen students get humiliated before. It happened at schools like this one more than people admitted. But she had never seen anyone react the way Daniel did, or rather, not react. "Hey," she said, "can I ask you something?" Daniel stopped and looked at her. No suspicion, no impatience, just calm, steady eyes. "Why don't you ever fight back?" she asked. "Ben has been cruel to you since day one. You're not scared of him. Anyone can see that. So why do you just let it happen?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, a small, peaceful smile that made Lily feel like she was the one who didn't understand something important. "Some battles aren't worth the noise," he said simply. Lily frowned. "That sounds like something from a fortune cookie." Daniel let out a short, quiet laugh. "Maybe," he said, "but I mean it." He gave her a small nod and turned to walk away. Lily watched him go, still unsatisfied with the answer. But then something caught her eye. A sleek black car was moving slowly along the road outside the school gate. It had dark windows and no visible license plate. As Daniel walked past it, the car slowed down even more. The window lowered slightly. The driver, an older man in a dark suit, gave Daniel a single, slow, respectful nod. Daniel nodded back without breaking his stride. That evening, Daniel sat alone in his small apartment. It was quiet, clean, simple. A single lamp on a desk, a few books stacked neatly, a window looking out at city lights far below. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. An unknown number, but he knew exactly who it was. He answered. The voice on the other end was old and warm, like someone who had lived a long life and was no longer in a hurry about anything. "How was today?" the old man asked. "The same," Daniel said. "Are you well?" "I'm fine." A pause. Then, "Everything is ready whenever you are. The board is waiting. The announcement can be made any time you choose." Daniel leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment. "Not yet," he said. Another pause. Longer this time. "You are patient," the old man said. "More patient than I ever was at your age." "I learned it from you," Daniel replied quietly. The old man made a soft sound, not quite a laugh, but close. Then his voice dropped lower, softer. "Your grandfather is proud of you," he said, "every single day." The call ended. Daniel set the phone down on the desk and looked out the window at the glittering city lights for a long time. He didn't look sad. He didn't look lonely. He looked like someone who was waiting for exactly the right moment. The rumors started small, the way they always do. Someone had found out, or claimed to have found out, that Daniel lived in a tiny apartment on the other side of town, not the good side. Not the side with wide, clean roads and tall gates and security cameras every few meters. The other side. The kind of neighborhood that students at Westbridge only ever saw from the windows of moving cars. Ben made sure everyone heard about it. He brought it up in the middle of the corridor, surrounded by his usual crowd, loud enough for half the hallway to hear. "Apparently," Ben said, drawing the word out slowly, "our mystery student takes 2 buses to get here every morning." He paused for effect. 2 buses. Can you imagine? His friends laughed on cue. "My family's driver takes longer than that just to warm up the car," someone else added. More laughter. Ben wasn't finished.
He started talking about his family's properties, their holiday house overseas, the private box at the stadium, the dinner his father had last month with a government minister. He wasn't really talking to his friends anymore. He was talking at Daniel. Daniel stood nearby, holding his books, listening to every word without blinking. He didn't smile, he didn't frown. He simply stood there with the same steady, unreadable expression he always wore. But across the corridor, one person wasn't laughing. Mr. Harlow, a business studies teacher, stood in his doorway watching the whole scene. His arms were folded. His eyes were fixed on Daniel, not with pity, but with something closer to careful recognition. After the last bell, Mr. Harlow stepped into the hallway just as Daniel was passing. "Daniel," he said quietly, "a moment, please." They went inside the empty classroom.
Mr. Harlow closed the door behind them and leaned against his desk with his arms still folded. He studied Daniel for a long second before speaking. "How are you settling in?" he asked. It was such a plain question, the kind teachers asked without really meaning it. But Mr. Harlow's eyes were not plain. They were sharp and searching. "I'm settling in well, sir," Daniel said politely. "Thank you for asking." "The other students," Mr. Harlow started. "Are fine," Daniel said smoothly. "Everyone is just getting to know each other." Mr. Harlow paused. A small, strange look crossed his face, almost like a smile that he decided not to finish. "Of course," he said slowly. "Well, my door is open if you ever need anything." "I appreciate that, sir." Daniel gave a small, respectful nod and walked out. The classroom went quiet. Mr. Harlow stood very still for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, took out his personal phone, not his school phone, and dialed a number. He waited for 2 rings. When the other end picked up, he didn't say hello. He didn't introduce himself. He just said in a low, careful voice, "Yes, he's here, just like you said." Then he hung up. It was Ben's most childish plan yet, but that didn't stop it from working. During gym class, while Daniel was changing, Ben and 2 of his friends maneuvered him toward the back of the building on a fake errand, something about equipment left in the storage room. The moment Daniel stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind him. He heard the click of the lock, then laughter on the other side, fading quickly as they jogged away. The storage room was small and dark. Shelves of old sports equipment lined the walls. A single high window let in a thin strip of afternoon light. Daniel stood still for a moment. Then he found a relatively clean spot on a stack of folded gym mats, sat down, pulled out the small notebook he always carried, and began to write. Hours passed. When the janitor finally unlocked the door late in the afternoon, he startled backward at the sight of someone inside. "Oh, goodness, I'm so sorry, son," the old man said, clutching his chest. "I had no idea anyone was in here. Are you all right?" "Perfectly fine," Daniel said, standing and straightening his clothes. "Thank you for opening." He stepped out calmly and smiled at the janitor, a real warm smile. The old man looked at him with wide eyes. He watched Daniel walk down the corridor with that same steady, unhurried pace. Then, almost to himself, the janitor murmured quietly, "You remind me of someone important."
By the end of that week, Ben had a new weapon, and this one spread faster than anything before. He told people Daniel was attending Westbridge through a special charity program, a fund designed to give free enrollment to students from struggling families. A sympathy seat, he called it. They do it for publicity, Ben explained loudly at lunch, gesturing with his fork like a man giving a lecture. Makes the school look generous. Meanwhile, real students whose families actually pay, have to sit next to someone who got in for free. The story traveled fast. By afternoon, people who had never spoken to Daniel were whispering about him in corners. Some looked at him with pity, some with quiet disgust. A few just looked away, embarrassed to be seen near him. Lily heard the rumor between second and third period. Unlike most people, she didn't just accept what she heard. She went to the school office during her free period and asked to see the Public Scholarship Board, a list the school posted every term showing which students received financial assistance. The administrator brought it out and slid it across the desk. Lily ran her fingers slowly down the names. She checked it twice, then a third time. She folded the paper, handed it back, and walked out of the office with a strange, tight feeling growing in her chest. Daniel's name was not on that list, not anywhere. The delivery arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as first period was about to begin. A driver in a neat gray uniform walked through the school's main entrance carrying a small parcel. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a simple cord, the kind of packaging that looked almost deliberately ordinary. The receptionist called down to Daniel's classroom. He excused himself quietly and walked to the front desk. The driver handed him the parcel with both hands and gave a short, formal bow of the head. No words, just that small, respectful gesture. Then the driver turned and walked back out to a waiting car. Daniel tucked the parcel under his arm and carried it back to class. He set it on the edge of his desk and didn't open it until lunch. Lily, sitting 2 tables away, watched him unwrap it with careful hands. Inside the brown paper was a small black box. Inside the box, resting on a cushion of dark cloth, was a watch. Not flashy, not covered in diamonds the way some of the other boys' watches were. Just clean, well-made, and clearly expensive in the way that only people who knew watches would recognize. Daniel lifted it out gently and fastened it around his wrist without hesitation, like he had been expecting it. Lily leaned forward slightly, squinting. She could just barely make out the engraving on the back of the watch face. 4 words, "For the future."
The announcement came on a Wednesday morning during assembly. The headmistress stood at the podium with her best formal smile and told the students that Westbridge Elite Academy would be hosting its most prestigious event of the year, the Grand Gala. It happened every year, a formal evening of speeches, performances, and recognition. Parents attended, local leaders attended, the press sometimes attended. For students like Ben, it was less about celebration and more about being seen in the right room with the right people. But this year was different. This year, the headmistress announced, the gala would be fully sponsored by an anonymous billionaire, a figure whose name hadn't been released yet, but whose reputation in the business world was, in her words, beyond impressive. The hall buzzed with whispers. Students turned to each other with wide eyes. Parents in the back row straightened up. Teachers exchanged glances. Ben sat in the 3rd row with his arms crossed and a slow smile spreading across his face. He leaned toward his friend Marcus and spoke just loud enough for the people around him to hear. "My father already knows who it is," he said with complete confidence. "They've met before, multiple times. These circles, they're small. Everyone important knows everyone important." Marcus nodded eagerly. Ben sat back with the comfortable look of someone who had never once doubted his place in the world. Across the hall, Daniel sat quietly in the last row, watching the headmistress speak. His expression gave away nothing at all. It didn't take long for Ben to turn the gala into another game. By lunchtime, he was holding court at his usual table, loud and confident, working the room the way he always did. And somewhere between the main course and dessert, the conversation turned to Daniel. "I'll bet anything," Ben announced, "that he doesn't even get through the door." His friends looked up. "The gala is a formal event," Ben continued. "You need the right clothing, the right invitation, the right people vouching for you. It's not a community dinner. It's not a school bus trip." He smiled at his own words. "Someone like him simply does not belong there." A few people laughed. Others stayed quiet, uncomfortable but unwilling to say so. Ben looked across the lunchroom until his eyes found Daniel sitting alone at his usual table, eating quietly. "Hey," Ben called out loudly. The room shifted. Heads turned. "The gala is coming. Should I ask them to set up a folding chair near the kitchen for you?" More laughter rippled through the room. Everyone looked at Daniel, waiting. Daniel set his fork down slowly. He looked up at Ben with calm, clear eyes. No anger, no embarrassment, no hurry. Then he spoke, quietly,
but clearly enough that the whole room could hear. "I'll be there," he said simply.
He picked his fork back up and continued eating. The laughter died quickly this time. Something about the way he said it left an uncomfortable silence hanging over the room. That same night, long after the school had gone dark and quiet, Daniel was somewhere else entirely. He stood in the lobby of a downtown skyscraper, the kind of building that doesn't need a large sign outside because everyone who needs to know already knows what it is. 50 floors of glass and steel rising into the night sky, every window lit from within. The security guard at the front desk looked up as Daniel walked in. He didn't ask for ID. He didn't reach for a sign-in sheet. He simply stood up straight, gave a short, respectful nod, and said, "Good evening, sir. He's expecting you." The second guard near the elevator pressed the button before Daniel even reached it. The doors opened immediately. Daniel rode up alone, all 50 floors, watching the city drop away beneath him through the glass wall of the elevator. He looked completely at ease, like a boy returning home after a long day, not like someone visiting one of the most powerful addresses in the country. The doors opened directly into a private office. The room was vast and quiet. Warm light fell across heavy wooden furniture and walls lined with framed photographs, awards, and maps marked with pins across 6 continents. An elderly man sat behind the main desk. When he saw Daniel, he didn't press a buzzer or call for an assistant or gesture to a chair. He simply stood up, slowly, with effort, and smiled. The kind of smile that belongs only to grandfathers. They sat across from each other in deep chairs near the window, the city glittering below them like a second sky. The old man, Chairman Reeves, as the rest of the world called him, poured 2 cups of tea himself. No assistant, no fuss. For a while, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Then the chairman leaned back and looked at Daniel with eyes that were old and sharp and full of something close to wonder. "You've endured more than most would," he said quietly. Daniel looked down at his cup for a moment. "I needed to," he said. "I needed to see people for who they really are, not who they pretend to be when the room is full of important names." The chairman was quiet for a moment. "And what did you find?" Daniel thought carefully before answering. "Some people are kinder than they let on," he said.
They stay quiet because they're afraid. And some people," he paused, "some people only know how to feel tall by making others feel small." The chairman nodded slowly, like a man hearing something he had already known for a very long time. "Your grandfather went through the same thing," he said softly, "many years ago, before any of this existed." He gestured toward the city below. "He was laughed at too." Daniel looked at him steadily. "I know, you told me." The old man smiled again. Then his voice shifted, still warm, but carrying something heavier. "Then the final test is near," he said. 2 days before the gala, Ben found a new way to strike. It was during the middle of a regular morning class. The teacher had stepped out briefly to make a copy of something, leaving the room to itself for a few minutes, which was all the time Ben ever needed. He walked past Daniel's desk slowly, deliberately, and knocked over the water bottle sitting at the edge. Water poured across the desk and soaked into Daniel's sleeve before he could move. Ben shrugged like it was an accident. His usual friends chuckled. But this time, something was different. The laughter was thinner, more uncertain. A few students didn't laugh at all. They just looked down at their desks or out the window, as if they suddenly didn't want to be connected to what was happening. Lily sat 2 rows over and watched everything. She watched Daniel stand up calmly, shake the water from his sleeve, take a folded handkerchief from his pocket, and quietly dry his arm and the desk without a single word. She watched Ben return to his seat looking satisfied. And she watched the rest of the class, watched the discomfort spreading across faces that had laughed freely just weeks ago. Something had shifted. She couldn't explain exactly what it was, but the room felt different now, like people were beginning to feel the weight of what they had been part of. Daniel sat back down and opened his notebook to a fresh page. His hand was perfectly steady. The business studies competition was something Westbridge took seriously. Every year, students were put into small groups and given a real-world problem to solve: a struggling company, a failing product, a market gap. They had 1 week to research, build a plan, and present it to a panel of teachers who scored them like judges. Daniel had been placed in a group with 2 quiet students who mostly kept to themselves. They were happy to let him lead, mostly because none of them knew each other well enough to argue. On presentation day, each group stood up one at a time. Ben's group went second. Their plan was polished, well-designed, full of charts and confident language. Ben presented it like someone who had been trained to speak in rooms like this since childhood, because he had. The teachers nodded and made approving notes.
Then it was Daniel's group. Daniel stood up without notes. He spoke for 7 minutes. He laid out a business plan that started simply and then kept going deeper, identifying a problem, mapping a solution, calculating projected costs, addressing risks, suggesting a phased rollout across 3 markets, and referencing 2 real companies that had tried similar approaches, and explaining precisely where they had gone wrong and how to avoid those same mistakes. The room got very quiet about 2 minutes in. By the end, one teacher had put down her pen entirely and was just listening. Another leaned over and whispered something to the teacher beside him. The head of the panel cleared his throat and said carefully, "Where did you study this material, Daniel?" Daniel simply said, "I read a lot, sir." Ben stared at him from across the room with an expression he was no longer bothering to hide. Lily found Daniel after school near the back stairwell, away from the main crowd. She had been looking for him since lunch and had nearly given up when she spotted him sitting on the bottom step, writing in his notebook as usual. She sat down beside him without asking. "I need to tell you something," she said. Daniel looked up. "Ben is planning something for the gala," she said. "I don't know all the details, but I heard him talking to Marcus this morning. Something about making sure you're turned away at the door. He's going to tell the staff at the entrance that you don't have a legitimate invitation, that yours is a mistake or a fake." She watched his face carefully as she spoke, looking for a flicker of worry or anger. There was none. Daniel listened to every word she said. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He looked down at his notebook, then closed it gently. He turned to Lily, and she noticed, not for the first time, how calm his eyes were. Not the calm of someone who didn't care, something different. The calm of someone who already knew how the story ended. "Thank you for telling me," he said, and he meant it. She could hear the sincerity clearly. Then he looked ahead and said, almost to himself, "Let him." Lily opened her mouth to argue, to tell him this was serious, that Ben's family had influence over the school, that it could actually work. But something in Daniel's voice made her stop. The night of the gala arrived dressed in gold light and expensive perfume. The entrance of Westbridge Academy had been transformed. String lights lined the pathway from the gate to the main doors. A red carpet ran the length of the front steps. Staff in formal black uniforms stood at precise intervals, and a string quartet played somewhere near the entrance hall. Cars arrived in a slow, glittering procession. Long black vehicles, silver sedans. One family arrived in something that looked more like a small yacht on wheels. Students stepped out in tailored suits and gowns that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Parents greeted each other with firm handshakes and wide smiles. Teachers stood near the entrance, looking quietly impressed by the version of their school they were seeing tonight. Ben arrived with his family,
His father in a dark suit, his mother in a long gown, both of them working the crowd immediately, shaking hands and laughing at the right moments. Ben walked beside them, looking perfectly at home in all of it. He scanned the arriving crowd with sharp eyes, waiting. Then he saw Daniel. Daniel walked through the main gate alone, wearing simple, clean clothing. Not a designer suit, not a rented tuxedo, just neat, pressed, understated clothes. Ben's face broke into a wide smile, the kind that has nothing friendly in it. He turned to Marcus and said something low, and Marcus laughed. It looked for all the world like Daniel had walked straight into a trap. The laughter didn't last long. It began just as the last few families were making their way up the red carpet steps, a distant sound, low and steady, growing slowly louder. Engines. Not one, several. People near the entrance turned first, drawn by the sound. Then more heads turned. Then the entire crowd outside went quiet in the way that crowds do when something unexpected is happening and no one is quite sure what it is yet. A convoy of vehicles came slowly around the corner and pulled up along the front of the school. Black, every one of them. Long and polished with dark windows and no visible markings. There were 4 vehicles in total, and they parked with the kind of smooth, practiced precision that comes from doing it every day. Doors opened. Men stepped out first, broad-shouldered, serious-faced, wearing dark suits with earpieces. Security. Real security, not the kind schools hire for events, the kind that surrounds people who require actual protection. They moved quickly and quietly, positioning themselves along the entrance in a loose, professional arrangement that communicated without a single word that this space now belonged to whoever was about to walk through it. Parents stepped back. Teachers stepped back. Even Ben's father, a man who prided himself on never being the one who moved aside, took one small, involuntary step backward. The crowd waited in total silence. Everyone was asking the same question without saying it out loud. The door of the lead vehicle opened. A man stepped out. Elderly, but straight-backed and deliberate in every movement. Silver-haired, dark suit, no jewelry except a single watch on his left wrist. He didn't look at the crowd when he first emerged.
He didn't smile or wave or perform for the people watching him. He simply stood, adjusted the single button on his jacket, and looked toward the school entrance with calm, settled eyes. Then one of the school's senior staff walked forward and extended a hand. The man shook it briefly, and as he did, someone nearby said the name in a hushed, disbelieving voice, the kind of voice people use when they see something they weren't prepared to see. The name moved through the crowd like a wave. It was a name that appeared in newspapers, in boardroom conversations, in business textbooks, a name attached to buildings in 3 different countries and a foundation that had funded hospitals, schools, and research centers across the continent. Everyone knew who he was. Ben's confident expression had gone completely still. He looked at his father. His father's jaw was tight, and his eyes were fixed on the elderly man with the expression of someone running a rapid calculation in their head. Because this was not someone Ben's father knew. This was someone Ben's father had only ever read about. The billionaire moved toward the entrance at an unhurried pace, his security team flanking him quietly. And just before he reached the steps, he stopped. He turned his head slowly toward the crowd, and his eyes found Daniel. For one long moment, the billionaire and Daniel simply looked at each other across the crowd. Nobody else understood what they were seeing. To the guests around them, it looked like a strange pause, an elderly man momentarily distracted before entering a building. A few people glanced between the old man and the boy in simple clothing, confused about why the most powerful person in the room was looking at a student who had arrived alone and unannounced. Then the billionaire did something nobody expected. He smiled. Not a polite smile, not the kind of practiced professional expression he had worn when shaking the staff member's hand moments ago. This was something warmer and deeper, the smile of a man seeing someone he loved after a long time apart. Daniel walked through the crowd toward him.
People stepped aside without being asked, sensing something shifting around them without fully understanding what it was. When Daniel reached him, the old man placed both hands firmly on Daniel's shoulders and looked at him the way a person looks at something they are genuinely proud of. They exchanged a few quiet words that nobody nearby could hear. Then, together, side by side, they walked up the steps and through the entrance of the gala. The crowd watched them go in complete silence. Ben stood very still among his friends, the confident smile long gone from his face, replaced by something pale and uncertain. His father put a hand on his shoulder and leaned close. "Do you know who that boy is?" his father asked quietly. Ben shook his head slowly.
Inside the hall, the gala was everything Westbridge had promised. Round tables dressed in white linen, tall candles burning in glass holders, the soft sound of a live band playing in the corner. Walls hung with the school's history, photographs of graduates, founders, championship trophies, framed letters from notable alumni. The guests took their seats. The headmistress welcomed everyone from the podium with a carefully prepared speech about legacy, excellence, and the responsibility of privilege. Then she introduced the evening's sponsor. The billionaire walked to the podium with the same unhurried steadiness he carried everywhere. He thanked the school. He spoke briefly about education and what it meant to invest in the next generation. His voice was low and measured, and the room held itself very still to hear every word. Then he paused. He looked out across the tables, past the parents in their expensive clothes, past the teachers sitting straight in their chairs, past the students who had spent weeks preparing for this night. His eyes moved slowly, deliberately across the room. When he spoke again, his voice was a little quieter, more personal, like a man setting down something he had been carrying for a while. "But tonight," he said, "I did not come for the school. I did not come for the speeches or the occasion." He paused once more, letting the silence sit. "Tonight, I came for someone very special." Every person in the room leaned forward slightly without realizing it. The billionaire reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a single piece of paper, though he barely glanced at it, as if the words were already living somewhere inside him. "A little over a year ago," he began, "I asked my grandson to do something most young men his age would refuse. I asked him to leave behind everything attached to his name, his home, his comfort, his reputation. I asked him to enter a new place as a complete stranger and live there quietly, without status, without protection, without anyone knowing who he was." The room was perfectly still. "I wanted him to learn something that cannot be taught in any classroom. I wanted him to see how the world treats a person when it believes that person has nothing, when it believes there is no benefit to being kind, no reward for being decent, no consequence for being cruel." He folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. What he found, the old man's voice tightened slightly just for a moment, was not always easy to watch. He looked out at the crowd again. "Daniel," he said simply, into the microphone. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Every head in the room turned. Daniel stood slowly from his seat near the back of the hall. He was calm, completely, entirely calm. The faces around him told the whole story. Eyes wide, mouths slightly open, the rapid, silent mathematics of people realizing all at once what they had done and who they had done it to. Ben's face had lost all its color. The room watched Daniel walk to the front. Some people shifted in their seats. Others looked at the table in front of them. A few of the students who had laughed the loudest in the corridors over the past months now sat very still, as if stillness might protect them from what was coming. Ben stood up. It took visible effort. His legs looked unsteady, but he stood, and he spoke, and his voice cracked slightly on the first word. "Daniel," he said, I want to say, in front of everyone, that I'm sorry. What I did wasn't right. I didn't know who you were, and He stopped, swallowed.
I know that's not good enough, he added quietly. The room waited. Daniel stood at the front beside his grandfather and looked at Ben for a long moment, not with anger, not with the cold satisfaction of someone finally holding power over the person who once held it over them. He just looked at him, steady and clear. Then Daniel stepped slightly forward and spoke. His voice carried easily through the quiet hall, unhurried and without performance. I accept your apology, Ben, he said simply. Ben blinked, clearly not expecting those words. But I want you to understand something, Daniel continued. My grandfather's name didn't make me worth treating well. I was worth treating well the day I walked through those gates with my old backpack and sat alone at that lunch table. He paused. We all were. He looked around the room slowly as he said the last part, not just at Ben, but at every face turned toward him. The hall stayed quiet for a long time after Daniel finished speaking. Not the uncomfortable silence of a room waiting for something to end, the deeper kind, the kind that comes when something true has been said out loud and people need a moment to let it settle.
Daniel's grandfather placed a hand on his back, light, proud, and steady. The headmistress eventually spoke. Teachers began to move. The band started playing again softly. The evening continued. But something had changed in that room, and everyone felt it. Ben sat back down slowly. He didn't speak for the rest of the night. His father beside him was quiet too, not with anger, but with the particular silence of a man reconsidering something he thought he already understood. Lily sat at her table with her chin resting on her hand, watching Daniel laugh quietly with his grandfather near the window. She thought about the first day she had seen him in the lunchroom, kneeling on the floor cleaning up spilled food with steady, patient hands. She thought about what he had said to her by the gate. Some battles aren't worth the noise, and understood it fully now for the first time. He had never been waiting to be rescued. He had never needed saving. He had been watching, learning, letting the truth about people reveal itself slowly and honestly, the way it only can when no one thinks they are being observed. Daniel left the gala that night beside his grandfather, walking through the same front gates he had first entered months ago as a stranger that nobody wanted to know. He left the same way he had arrived, quietly, steadily, with nothing to prove to anyone. The story you have just heard is one I carry close to my heart. I share it with you today not to celebrate wealth or to shame cruelty, but to ask one simple question of every person listening. How do you treat someone when you believe they have nothing? That answer, that quiet, unguarded answer, is who you truly are. Daniel never needed a billionaire grandfather to make him worthy of kindness, and neither does the person sitting beside you on the bus, or standing behind you in a line, or eating alone in a room full of noise. What is one kind thing you have done for someone that nobody else knows about? Tell me in the comments below. Let us remind the world together that decency still lives in ordinary people doing quiet things. Every story is a candle, and sometimes one candle is enough to help a person find their way through the dark. God bless you, and make courage guide your hands in every room you enter. Before you go, I am leaving one of this channel's most beloved folktales on your screen, a story many of you have written to me about with tears in your eyes. I believe it will find you exactly when you need it. Thank you for staying with me until this very last word.